I wrote Smile because there was a time when I was feeling completely overwhelmed about what was going on in the wider world, things that you feel you've got just no control over, but have a big impact on how you see things. And if you're not careful, you can start to lose a sense of hope, and it's very hard to feel joy when you aren't feeling hopeful. And so I thought, oh, I need to look at some of these things through the eyes of a child. And the child I picked was Clarice Bean, because I first started writing about her 30 years ago. And I like the way she looks at the world with a kind of curiosity, which I feel the younger we are, the more of it we have, and the better we are at sort of seeing things with optimism. I'm going to read a bit from the very beginning of the book called Wishfully Thinking, where Clarice Bean is talking about her daydreaming. She's always daydreaming. At the moment, I'm daydreaming about inventing something that could change the world. I'm not sure how or what it would do, but I'd like to invent something which changes everything for the better, because of all the things, it's the better that's needed. And that really kicks off the book, and how she's looking at her immediate world, the little things that are going on in her family that actually turn out to be much bigger things than she thinks at first. Often we're told not to daydream, or that daydreaming is a loss of concentration and that we're meant to concentrate all the time. But I really think daydreaming serves an enormous purpose. I don't think we would do it otherwise. And I think what Clarice is doing is she's sort of collecting her thoughts. And I think that's what happens when we just let our minds float and things begin to collide and connect, and we begin to understand things in a different way. And in a sense, that's what this book is about. It's about how those little thoughts and those little ideas all, when collected up, make much bigger thoughts and ideas. And that if we don't give the time to think, we don't give ourselves the time to think and listen and understand, then we never get to problem solve and we never get to create. In the story, Clarice Bean is really looking at what's going on in her family, and there are things that are happening, like her father's very unhappy at work. This seems to be having an impact on his health, and no one knows what's wrong with him, but he's not feeling great. And this means that her mother is quite stressed by this, because someone often carries the weight of worry, and that often happens in families. And Clarice is looking at all this and seeing the impact of all these little things that are going on and how big they are becoming in her family. And that's the thing, that we can always look at other people's lives and think, oh, well, that's not such a big thing. But to us, it's very big. And particularly when you're a child, it's incredibly big and very important. So that's one of the themes, really, of the story, is that. And then the things that are also happening in the wider community, in her local community and in her street. And there's been this talk about the trees being chopped down in her street because they're a trip hazard, because the roots all come to the surface and push the paving slabs up and people might trip over. And so people are worrying about this. But she's thinking about, but what happens when we chop a tree down? Because that tree supports an awful lot of life that we're often not aware of. All the beetles, all the insects, and how that impacts on the birds and all the other things that live in the trees. And so she comes up with a plan to not only make people understand the importance of the trees, the value of the trees, how they also impact on the beauty of our environment, and beauty makes a difference to us. But she also thinks of a way of perhaps finding a way around all the trip hazards, and so she actually comes up with a scheme that might make it possible for the trees to remain. So one of the threads in the story is about Clarice Bean doing this project, and she has to create a piece of artwork without words that conveys the importance of one of our most endangered species and what we will lose if that disappears from the planet. And she decides that she's going to pick our biggest fish, which is a whale shark. And whale sharks, you know, you'd think, oh, they're this huge fish. They are sort of at the top of the chain. But they're not, because they eat one of the tiniest creatures in the ocean, which is the plankton. So it's the biggest fish eating almost the smallest. And they are completely dependent on these creatures. And these creatures, the plankton, are dependent on the ocean being at the right temperature. And we are also dependent on the plankton because certainly the plant plankton provides almost half our oxygen. And so you see the balance of everything and how the biggest and the smallest are completely related and they need each other. And so that's what Clarice Bean realises, and she comes up with this very clever solution to this piece of art. And I wanted to really think about that and hopefully make you think about the importance of you in the world as well, because we can often feel too tiny to make a difference, as if it wouldn't make any difference whether we were here or not. But actually we all do play a part, and the way we react to things makes a difference, even if it's just because it affects the next person or the next creature. The way we behave makes a difference. And I think that's what Clarice Bean learns from this, is the impact of the small within the big. And I always think when we're thinking that we're too small to make a difference and that nothing tiny can really make a difference in a big way, I always think of clothes moths. And you might know clothes moths because they might be living in your house. And the thing about them is they're so tiny, and they lay these tiny, tiny eggs that hatch into larvae, and then these tiny creatures eat through your clothing. And if you don't think a tiny thing can cause a lot of impact, then, you know, you need to come to my house, because you can see what's happened to this beautiful blanket, and they just steadily eat away. But they're only pests because they've got into the wrong place, and we actually need them to be living outside and doing what they're meant to do, rather than eating things in our houses. But I always think they're quite a good reminder to us about perhaps the way we behave, and we sometimes get into other creatures' environments and mess that up for them. And that's what I'm saying about the trees being chopped down in this story, is that when we chop down a tree, it has a huge impact on the nature that is supported by that tree. But it's also nature that we really, really need. We might not be aware of it, but it's very, very important and vital to us. The book is called Smile, not because it's telling everyone to go around smiling despite what might be going on in their lives, but rather because a smile is a communication, and that we can't make people smile. So those people who tell you to cheer up or to smile, actually it's a really unhelpful thing to do. Really what you want to do is get someone to smile because perhaps you've communicated a kindness to them, you've done something that sort of gives them a sense of meaning. Perhaps it's you've made them laugh, perhaps you've given them something, perhaps you've paid them a compliment, and those are the things that do just naturally make us smile. And so in a way that's what the book's about. It's really about taking part. And Clarice Bean sort of says, everything plays a part, no matter how minuscule, And the tiny things can end up having a big effect, just like the plankton. And the plankton might only be drifting, but drifting is important. Same as when you daydream and your mind lets go and comes up with thoughts you might never have had if you were concentrating. And the thoughts take you somewhere and turn into tiny ideas, and even the smallest idea can change the world. So it's important to take part.